Welcome everyone. My name is Marie. I am with A Sweat Life, and for those of you who are new to A Sweat Life, we are a wellness media company, and we've been doing lots of digital workshops over the past few months, just trying to provide some ways to have fun at home. And we are really excited to be working with Pulp Culture and Peter, who does their fermentation, and he can share a little bit more about what that means shortly. And we're gonna do a little fermentation 101, and then he's gonna show us how to make our own fermented hot sauce.
Yeah, well, it's thanks to everybody for coming. My name's Peter. Just a heads up, I am in downtown LA, so if you hear any trains or honking or angry traffic sounds, that's why. Yeah, so I'm the production director here at 101 Cider House and Pulp Culture. So we specialize in doing wild fermented alcoholic beverages. Got a couple cans here in case you guys have seen the branding around. So our I guess, ethos of making products is to do a natural fermentation. We'll kind of get into what that means in a little bit. But our products all just naturally have no remaining sugar, no carbohydrates, and they're about as low calories you can get for an alcoholic beverage. Our kind of motto here is drink better. So our concept is to have healthy beverages in your lifestyle. I think there's a real trend right now, which is eating healthy, taking care of yourself, being mindful of a lot of different things, not just nutritionally speaking, but we really wanted to branch out into the beverage world and do something that you could feel good about drinking. I know, like myself, for example, I really like to eat very healthy. And I think until we had kind of started this brand about 5 years ago with 101 Cider House first, and then last year with Pulp Culture, you kind of have like a beer at the end of the day or something, and crack it open and say, like, oh, well, I'm done with everything else today. This is going to make me relaxed and be a little tired, sleepy. And we just didn't necessarily think that was how things ought to be. We wanted you to be able to enjoy yourself without having to compromise your health, basically. Personally, I've always been into fermented foods. I think the first thing I ever made was accidentally fermenting some hard cider under my bed in college. It was an accident, I swear. So I guess I'll start with what fermentation is, first of all. So the technical definition for fermentation is breaking down carbohydrates into something else using microorganisms. So you can think of carbohydrates as being like sugar is really the biggest source for all of these microorganisms. And there's different kinds. I mean, there's alcoholic fermentation that a lot of people are familiar with, obviously with beer being somebody's favorite fermented food out there. There's also probiotic fermentation, which has gained a lot of, it's been in the public eye a lot more recently in the last, I'd say, decade or so than it has been in the past. And you can also get things like vinegar out of fermentation. And usually when I talk about fermented foods, people are think, it's like kind of like yucky cabbage stuff or sauerkraut or strong flavors that they may not be as familiar with in their own homes. But actually, everybody pretty much eats fermented foods. That includes things like bread, coffee, chocolate, cheese, which is probably my favorite fermented food. So there's things that people have really incorporated into their diet without knowing. And some of the benefits you get out of that are, probiotics, the things that are a little bit easier to digest. And let me, my computer's freezing a little bit there. So typically what you see in the alcoholic fermentation world are, it's a monoculture basically. So you'll get, let's say, beer, for example, you'll add a lab-grown yeast into it so you can make these repeatable results every single time. And we do it a little bit differently. So naturally in the air and on fruit, things like that, there's all these microorganisms that provide a lot of benefit, and they create alcohol and probiotics, things like that. If any of you guys have ever, been to pick your own fruit, you might see like an apple or grape and they have like a little white dust on it when you pick them. And that's actually yeast growing naturally in these orchards, grapevines, apples. And we like to harness that stuff so we don't have to add any monocultured yeast. Not to say that those are necessarily bad, but you only get alcohol out of those. When we're talking about, making cider with these, variety of things on the fruit, so you'll get the alcohol from the yeast that's already on there. There's, it's in the air, you breathe it in. Same concept as like sourdough bread, basically, where you have like a starter of flour, water, and you keep stirring it. And those things are just in the air will naturally start fermenting sourdough. With cider, we kind of do the same thing. We press the juice. All those things are naturally incorporated into it because we haven't pasteurized it. So all of the things that are going to ferment our cider come from nature, from the orchard. And even in our cider house, these things are just kind of in the air floating around. It takes a little bit longer, which is why a lot of people don't necessarily do what they call a wild fermentation or a natural fermentation. So kind of going back to, you like to use the term like industrial wine or industrial beer. What you want there basically is repeatability and the smallest time frame possible so that you can make as much of it, sell as much of it, make as much money as possible. And this was sort of a trend that we saw starting, really in the late 1900s, after World War II. People wanted to, there was some problems getting food supplies, so people started making mass-produced things like bread. So prior to that, bread was all sourdough. There weren't really like commercial yeast strains, things like that available out in the world. So people would just bake it traditionally like sourdough. But sourdough, if you guys have tried to make it, as I know a lot of people have in quarantine, it takes quite a bit of time to get those cultures started. So instead, these companies figured out you could just pump steam into it, puff the bread up, and that's kind of how you get things like Wonder Bread, which I'm probably don't need to tell you is not the most nutritious bread in the world. And one of the things that you lose when you ferment things, or when you don't ferment things and you just do them that way, you don't get the probiotic elements. Fermentation actually creates vitamins, minerals, organic acids, all things that are really good for your body. So, I know this is kind of like a long way to get to where we're going with alcohol, but one of the things I really like to talk about to do with sourdough, there's kind of been this rise of gluten intolerance, basically. I'm sure my girlfriend has celiac disease, so I'm very up to date on my gluten-free foods, things like that. But they found actually, I think in Michael Pollan's book, he was talking about the omnivore's dilemma, which I know a lot of people have read, that these traditionally fermented sourdough breads actually consume a lot of the gluten. So people with celiac disease they've actually found can eat some sourdough breads that have been fermented long enough, because it's breaking down the gluten molecule, like the gluten protein. I guess to get back to why we wanted to make like a healthier alcoholic beverage and why fermentation is so great, it breaks down things that your body would have trouble digesting. So in the terms of our alcoholic beverages like this, it's taking all the sugar out. Sugar is a fuel source for yeast and probiotic bacteria. So instead of you consuming a lot of sugar when you drink one of these, you get probiotics, you get all of the B vitamins created naturally in fermentation, you get the alcohol, of course, which is fun. But you're not getting tons of sugar from it. You're not getting all the carbohydrates that would be left over in, say, like a grocery store beer. I think also one of the other movements that we've really gotten into are like natural foods, or having simple ingredients, or you don't have to read like a huge list of things to understand what's in your beverage. So see if I can zoom in on the camera. I think I would know where these are in here. Oh, there we go. Ingredients, apples. So that's it. And that's one of the things that's cool about fermented foods is they preserve themselves a little bit. So, with like fermented hot sauce, you can leave it out. You don't have to necessarily refrigerate it. You can if you want to, if you just like cold hot sauce. I leave mine on the counter because I like to smell it a lot. So, even with, I'll use two examples. So you have, grocery store wines, like ones that you see everywhere that you could buy in any grocery store in America. And then, I can also talk about some more common hot sauces. But with the wine, you have no ingredient list on those. It's actually illegal for you to put ingredients on a bottle of wine. And I mean, there's a lot of theories as to why that is, but there is a ton of lobbying in the wine industry, and any kind of fermented food. I mean, you think, profitable food goods that are made very quickly as opposed to doing it traditionally. People don't necessarily want you to know that it's not super traditional, that you're not getting what you paid for. So in the terms of wine, if you bought a wine that said Merlot and there was anything but Merlot grapes in that, it would be kind of upsetting to read on the label. You'd feel like you're getting cheated. But being that is a fermented product, so there's a little bit of variability with that, and also that it's an agricultural product. So it's, the Merlot grapes that you're going to get aren't going to taste the same year to year just due to the terroir of things. So they add a lot of fillers in the wine to make it taste the same year to year. So when you're buying like a gallon jug of Merlot wine, there might be there might have been a Merlot grape in there at one point, but for the most part, it's fillers, preservatives, and probably a lot of sugar. Same thing with like commercial hot sauce. I mean, those aren't necessarily as bad, but you'll see on the back a lot of times, like sriracha, for example, has sulfites in it, which is also a common preservative in wine. And usually comes in a powdered form, and it basically deprives cells of moisture so they die, which is a way to prevent spoilage. It's not necessarily something I personally want to eat. I try not to eat any funky preservatives. They're used a lot in wines. I mean, if you got kind of like a sulfury smell in some, especially large volume, commonly grocery store wines, you'll probably be consuming quite a bit of sulfites. And so I guess to bring it back to our fermented foods, fermented beverages, one of the cool things about fermenting in the way that we do with our cider and with the way that we're going to make this hot sauce is that it naturally protects itself. So it's sort of the same idea you see in farming where, you have monoculture crops, they get some kind of disease or pest and it just eats the whole thing because that's all there is. It's just that one crop. And you could sort of similar with our little microorganism friends that are fermenting our foods for us. With the monocultured lab-grown yeast, there's only one thing in there that can, and if there's something that it doesn't like in the environment, or if another pest or some other kind of bacteria comes in it doesn't like, it'll take over. Whereas with a wild fermentation, you have so many different things. I mean, just in our cider and in hot sauce, you get dozens of different kinds of wild, naturally occurring yeasts. There's my favorite train. It must be 420 here. The train comes every day, not a weed joke. But anyway, so you have all these microorganisms playing a part in it. They protect themselves basically by having a much more diverse microbiome. The probiotic bacteria, which will be like lactic acid bacteria, which I can probably talk to you for hours about different kinds of that. It's what gives things its sourness. They call it lactic acid bacteria because when it eats stuff, it produces lactic acid in particular. But that one's a very resilient organism, and there's probably, I think when we do tests on our cider, for example, I mean, there's billions and billions of CFUs of, probably 20 to 30 different kinds of lactic acid bacteria on top of our wild yeast. So basically what that means in terms of preserving your food or preserving your drinks are that when other, let's say you get some funky bacteria out in the air. If this were just a monoculture cider or just a hot sauce that was not fermented, it could take over, it could spoil it, it could grow mold, it could grow, funky, unhealthy, toxic bacteria. But because these things are purposely an environment that we've created for this fermentation, those things all protect each other. So even though one bacteria that comes in to invade the liquid or the hot sauce, it might really eat up one of those yeast and just completely destroy it. But then there's 12 others behind it, plus all this other bacteria that it has to compete with, so it just can't survive. And it's actually, this is one of the oldest ways of preserving foods. I think people, way back when, there's all these history books on different kinds of beer and how that came about in history. But basically somebody had figured out that if you left, grain out in water, it would turn into something that made you feel kind of nice. And then they figured out that that stuff also didn't go bad, which, if let's say you're a farmer and, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, you don't have access to refrigeration, you don't have access to traditional preservatives that we use now. Being able to store your food and your calories and your energy, that's really helpful. So that was one of the ways that they employed fermentation. Even with, any kind of, you can really pickle any kind of vegetable food, fruits, meats, whatever you want. Same with cider. People wanted to preserve their apples or to, preserve their grains or preserve their grapes or however they could do it to make sure they had enough food and drink to last them however long it was till their next growing season. My stool was taking a dive there. So anyway, with the preservative effect on there, we also over time sort of co-evolved with these microorganisms, and that's where you see a lot of benefit with probiotic elements. Some of the new studies are finding, like the appendix, for example, isn't actually useless. They find that it's where we store a lot of our good gut bacteria, so you're a reserve of that. I was reading this thing on just kind of, getting my notes together for this, so I didn't ramble as much. They say that when you are an adult, you have about 2 to 3 pounds of bacteria and like microorganisms in your body, which is pretty crazy. That's a pretty significant amount of stuff you can't even really see. So over time, basically, we evolved with these things. One of the reasons too that we consider these things probiotic, which means basically good for life or good for you. They evolved in our food. So when we would eat them, they were incorporated into our microbiome internally. And if they were bad for you, the human probably wouldn't live. It's like, bad bacteria, not good for you. But with these kind of lactic acid bacteria, it had a symbiotic relationship with us. It would eat, what we now call prebiotics or undigestible fiber, things like that. So that would be in our guts. It would break down stuff that we had a hard time digesting, that we weren't really gaining any nourishment from, and then create I think we find a lot of vitamins. In particular, I know B vitamins are something that most fermented foods contain more of than their unfermented counterparts. They're good for your digestion on a really simple level. They also have found all these studies too, where they say people that consume a lot of probiotics or have a good microbiome have clearer skin. You don't get sick as much. You don't you have a better metabolism. They're finding all these different links to your microbiome that probiotics can help you with. Even there's some. Not to make it gross when we're talking about food here, but they've even recently discovered some cures by doing what they call a fecal transplant, where they take feces, put them in someone else when they have really difficult to. I think it was C. difficile. I can't remember what. Yeah, thanks, Gus. You're the man. So they basically take somebody else's microbiome and implant it into somebody else through your feces, and it has actually been the most effective treatment that they have found to cure C. diff. It was before they would use basically the opposite approach, where they would try and kill it with antibiotics and just wasn't doing anything. There's all these really cool anecdotal things about probiotics as well, where I was reading this one online yesterday that somebody had like an ear infection that was recurring, and they'd been like plagued with it by for a year basically, and then he just was reading about probiotics, took some earwax from the other ear and put it in there, because it's just kind of a microbiome and basically your whole body, and that cured it. I know that's some kind of gross stuff, but I just think it's important in understanding why like probiotics are something that are very beneficial to include in your life. Let's see. So basically with these drinks here, we try and get sorry, there's a motorcycle gang going by me here. And a train. It's loud here. So we wanted to take those concepts and basically apply them to nutritionally our alcoholic beverages for 101 Cider and Pulp Culture, because it's something that we were really passionate about with health. The other thing that's cool about fermented products too, you can preserve, adaptogenic herbs, or you can put healthier things in them that you might not necessarily consume in a large quantity at once. So if you guys are, I know adaptogen is kind of a new term people are throwing around in the health world, but basically what that means is an herb, or in some cases mushrooms, or it's something that has a positive effect on your body. So I'll use our Pulp Culture blend here, for example. So we have some fruits, herbs, and lion's mane as a mushroom that we used. So I'll use ginger because that's a really, everybody knows what ginger tastes like. Ginger is considered an adaptogenic herb because it has all these different, it's good for your digestion. It helps with all these things. I think everybody knows it's pretty common cure if you have a stomach ache to eat some ginger, things like that. And with adaptogens, that's basically the concept. It's something that is good, beneficial for your body, that comes from a plant form. And it's actually kind of interesting to see this come around in the mainstream world. I brought some books here. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this book, Sacred and Herbal Healing Beers. Kind of an outdated name, I think, but it's basically all about ways people have used, herbs in their alcoholic beverages to promote health. And taking a lot from traditional Chinese medicine versus could you put an herb like rosemary or sage? Sorry, I know you guys are supposed to be reading the questions, but they popped up. Yeah, you can use all kinds of herbs. Rosemary is really good. I know a lot of people use rosemary oil as sort of like a cure for colds or things like that. I'm sure sage is good for you too. What's kind of interesting about the adaptogens, and even like hot peppers are considered adaptogen, is one of the reasons why I bring it up. We know that these are good for you, or these things have these effects because people have been using them to do these things for, literally thousands of years. But we don't really. Sorry? Oh. But yeah, so we don't really necessarily know why they do those things, but because people have realized that we've been using these things and have had a consistently good effect on them, people are looking into it more scientifically. And I think that's kind of where adaptogens have entered the scene in terms of serious nutrition and medical thought. Even reading about ginger, there are 115 active components in one root of ginger that have an effect on the human body. They don't know what they all are or what they all do, but they know altogether what they do. They were finding that one of the reasons that ginger is good for your stomach is that when you eat ginger, there are some enzymes in your stomach that are in much higher amounts than they would be. They don't know how it helps you make it, but they know that if you eat a lot of ginger, there's more of those enzymes there. And I think when, it's kind of cool that we just are having to trust that that's there, because we keep observing people feeling better that way. Same thing, generally probiotics. There's really not a lot of scientific understanding in terms of even how they work. When people, eat these herbs, eat these, probiotic elements in their lives, we just know what happens. We don't necessarily know why. And I think that's kind of cool. It's cool to just have to trust that something works, or to have to rely on your own experiences for it. That some of the theories with probiotics are that, the bacteria makes it to your gut and they just live there. There's other theories too that say that the bacteria actually doesn't survive, but it provides all these other parts the bacteria already in your gut can absorb and use those parts to digest stuff that's already there. There's all kinds of stuff. There are even some that it'll go in there, create different cultures and change over time, which is probably true as well. But it's just kind of cool that all these new ideas about what is healthy are coming out now, and especially in terms of things that we're already consuming. I think one of the reasons that I feel so passionate about some of the pulp culture juices that we make are that they are, they're applying all these things that are seemingly new and cutting edge in your nutritional world, but they're actually things that there's tons of information for. I've showed you this book. Here's one on mushrooms and how good they are for you, and all of the beta glucans and how they can affect your immune system, affect your energy levels. Or even this one's the best title in my opinion, Drunken Botanist. But that's just all about different ways that people have used herbs to create cocktails, and also be mindful of things that your health or with your health. So the other thing about fermented foods I like is that there's no sugar in them. I've never really had much of a sweet tooth. I've always preferred salty things. But sugar is obviously not super good for you. And even with, say, like sriracha type hot sauces, there's a ton of sugar in those. You might not be putting a lot of it on, or me, I just drench my food in hot sauce basically. But there's a lot of sugar in that. Same with commercial wines, ciders, juices, things like that. If they're not fermented, those sugars are still present in there. So with fermentation, those bacteria have already eaten that, consumed all the sugar out of it, so you don't have to worry about processing that necessarily. You can just get kind of straight to the more important parts that you want, like maybe the alcohol or the herbs or the spicy flavor or something like that. So I think I'm going to show you guys how to cut up some peppers for this before I talk myself to death here. But I have to put on my spicy apron here first. And if you guys have any questions about all of that, I know that's kind of it's always funny when I talk about this stuff because I spend 8 hours at least a day thinking about it, and sometimes I feel like it's hard to back up to not that.
We just had one question. If ghost peppers are hotter than Carolina Reapers?
Well, I'm from North Carolina, so I'm gonna say the Carolina Reapers are better and hotter.
And then do you need to wear gloves or goggles for the hot sauce making?
I kind of wondered if somebody would ask me that. Yeah, you probably should. I never do, but I always regret it later. If you're just really, I'll show you guys how to cut them without like getting too spicy on yourself there. It's actually one of the other things about herbs that's, I was talking about peppers being good for you. They've actually found that capsaicin is, they use it as, what do they call it? It numbs your pain, like if you rub it topically on your skin. I don't know if that's just because like then your hand is just too spicy and that hurts more than whatever was bothering you, but I know people have used it for that before. So take your pepper like this, just good knife etiquette here. If you hold your fingers kind of like that, so that way if you mess up or sneeze halfway through and you potentially cut yourself, you only scrape yourself instead of like this where you would cut your finger off. So you want to maybe cut that off, a little stem. Nobody wants to eat the stems. And you don't necessarily need to cut them in any particular shape or size. I kind of do this because you're basically going to be blending it later. Ooh, it's a spicy one. I can smell it from here. You just kind of throw those in. The other reason you may not want to use the stems, aside from them just tasting kind of gross and woody, they are a lot of plants that grow from blossoms that way with the fruit. They actually have enzymes in the stems or the flower buds they help them ripen when they're on the plant, but it'll make them go really kind of soft and mushy if they're in your fermented food, because those enzymes will be released in the liquid.
I noticed that you are not getting rid of any seeds. Is that kind of just, you never get rid of the seeds, or if like you're someone who doesn't like a lot of spice?
Yeah, if you wanted to get rid of the seeds, I never do just because I do like a lot of spice. If you want to get rid of the seeds though, you can kind of cut them down the middle like that, and then just scrape it out a little bit like that.
You are bold scraping that out with your fingers.
I know. I'm going to go and touch all my coworkers with my hands later. And just kind of mush them down in there. Yeah. And I'm just really trying to get my adaptogenic herb on my hand, basically. Here's the garlic. If you just peel it kind of like that, I usually smash it a little bit like that to break the skin. It also helps when basically the the reason you have garlic, it has a compound in it called allicin, which I think is ALLICIN, if you want to fact check me later. But the garlic actually starts releasing it more once it's smashed or cut up, so you actually need to damage a little bit for those cell walls to break down and release the flavor into it. Plus, it's a good way to get some aggression out on a small level if you want to smash up some garlic. And you can really make it however garlicky you want. I like mine pretty garlicky, so just throw them in like that. You can also, if you have anything else in there you think might be a tasty flavor in the sauce, go for it. The cool thing about like fermenting any kind of vegetable is it all works. Typically, like I was saying, these things were created like recipes and types of fermented foods. It's not necessarily because people were out to make, say like sauerkraut. They just knew they had a lot of cabbage and they didn't want it to go bad. So let's use what they had. You can, I've thrown like citrus fruits in here, any other herbs that you have that you think might be tasty in a sauce. Anything like that's pretty fun.
Someone actually asked, what's the weirdest ingredient you've included in a hot sauce?
Well, I guess depending on who are, maybe anchovies, but actually, like a fish sauce you see in Asian restaurants uses, they're not anchovies. I can't remember the name of the fish. No, it's a tiny little fish.
And then do you blend it when you're ready?
Yeah. I have so I was telling the Sweat Life people that I really have had this fantasy of having a cooking show for a long time. So I have our finished product here, which I will show you how to process. Sorry, once you get all of your peppers in there that you feel good about, what we're going to do is create a selective environment for the bacteria that we want. So when we make our ciders or hard-pressed juices with Pulp Culture, the way that we ferment it, basically we have our tanks, we have a little bit of oxygen exposure, but not very much. So it's what, you can look at me while I talk to you instead of just letting me wave my hands. Basically, we're creating this selective environment with our ciders and juices that are ideal for the kind of things that we want to ferment them, basically meaning yeast and lactic acid bacteria. We do that kind of by the way our tanks are set up and by the way that we move the juice around. With fermented foods, it's actually a salt brine. So a lot of, most bacteria actually can't live in salt. Salt dehydrates things, which is bad for the cells. But because humans need salt to survive and these bacteria kind of co-evolved with us, they have a tolerance to salt that most things do not. There are some specific ratios that you can weigh out if you want to be really, really precise about this. Usually you want to aim for 3% salt brine, meaning that by weight, 3% is salt and water, or the 97% water. It's, I think in like a liter of water, it's like 20 grams of salt, which is not very much. I personally don't really measure a lot of things, so I'll just kind of show you how much salt I put in there. If you do have a kitchen scale, what I would do is just maybe get a cup of water or something, see how much that weighs, and then add salt to it to make it the 2 to 3% that you would want. Yeah, that's about all you need. Maybe a little more if you want to feel salty like I do. There we go. And just throw a little water in there to cover it. Ran out of water. Couldn't get my my sink here in the shop, but yeah. So basically, you just want to cover everything so it kind of pokes down that way. You can buy these things online. They're called Airlocks, but they help prevent any oxygen from getting in, which I don't necessarily think is super good for making fermented foods. It's not bad. I think personally I just like to smell it too much while it's fermenting. So the idea of like not letting any air in seems sort of, I don't know, counterproductive to the fun part of it for me. So you just put a little lid on it like that, give it a little shake. And you just let it sit out on your counter for don't know, say 5 days. What you'll notice is that the peppers will kind of start to lose color. So here is the finished one. You can see the color difference there. It will create some pressure. Some of the bacteria likes to make carbon dioxide along with other things. So let's see if this one has a little fizz to it. Need a strong arm to open some of these sometimes. I don't know if you can see the fizz in there. But it's good. You'll see on these mason jar lids, they'll pop up a little bit if there's too much pressure or anything. But I'd say, just once every day while it's fermenting, just come by, get a little shake, open it up, see what it smells like. Spicy. And then that's pretty much it. You just let it sit out there. You'll see it start doing some stuff. I think one of the things that originally really attracted me to making stuff like this is just that it really does come alive. I mean, even if you don't necessarily know, or even if you do know what's happening, it's still really cool to see. Like when you open it, there's all these bubbles, there's all these evidence of life happening in something that was not there before. Even our big cider tanks will have so much activity from yeast and bacteria fermenting that it actually develops its own. And it's not even just like a little currently. You could probably say a little. It's pretty strong sometimes. I always think about what people must have thought about that, like before we had, microscope basically. You see, there's all these kind of religious things with fermented foods in particular, like wine or beer in some cultures. And I can just imagine, like you put this liquid of just juice that you haven't done anything to, like it's just they just smashed up these grapes and put them in this bucket, and now they're foaming over, they're moving around. I mean, I can definitely see how people would have the idea that it's sort of a fancy spirit thing going on there. So
we have had a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Is it okay to just use minced garlic versus and then do you recommend opening the jars once a day, or in how many days do you leave it?
Yeah. So versus the minced garlic, that's fine as long as there is no oil in it. The oil can kind of mess with the bacteria. If there's, I would say just check on the label of the minced garlic and make sure that there's no preservatives and no fat content in there, basically. So I know some of them are preserved in like olive oil, or sometimes you'll see something. I think usually they use like sulfites or say like potassium metabisulfite, I think, on garlic. So I would not use those, because those are the things I was talking about earlier with wine that is meant to preserve things. And preserving is, at least in the fermentation world, things would kill everything. Yeah, otherwise, I mean, this one I made with just pre-peeled garlic, I think I got from Trader Joe's or something. I should also mention too, you might notice this, so salt, a lot of salt will have iodine added to it, which is totally fine. It won't mess with your flavor or anything, but if you can kind of see the bottom there, iodine reacts with garlic in a liquid where it makes it turn kind of blue. So, don't be freaked out if you see blue garlic in there. It just means there's iodine in your salt. You can use like sea salt, kosher salt, stuff like that if you want to avoid that. I should also say too, one of the, I know a lot of people are sort of freaked out about fermented foods because they're worried that it's going to be unsafe or it's going to grow mold and you won't know, and you'll eat it and it will be super bad for you. You keep a lid on this and you just shake it up like that, you're very, very unlikely to grow any mold. And if you do grow any mold, mold it's an aerobic organism, so it'll have sorry, more trains on now. So mold will just grow on the top. It looks fuzzy, so if you see any fuzz, don't eat it. But as the bacteria chomp away at this, ferment it, one of the ways it preserves it is by creating a more acidic environment. So as I mentioned, it's called lactic acid bacteria. It's the kind of primary family of probiotic bacteria. It's called lactic acid bacteria obviously because it produces lactic acid, which in turn creates an inhospitable environment for things like mold or other bad organisms that you wouldn't want to eat. you can smell it when it goes bad. It smells pretty bad. Oh, sorry. How many days on the counter? I think on average it's about 5. I would say just when while it's fermenting, you'll see a lot of bubbles in it when you open it. That's a lot of the byproduct of fermentation is carbon dioxide, so CO2, or like the same kind of bubbles you'd find in like a soda or a beer or anything. So when you notice that those start to slow, it's pretty much done fermenting. In the summertime, if it's really hot, it doesn't take very long. I think when I was living in the South, it was like 95 degrees and super humid, and it took like 2 days for it to be done once, which was pretty cool. Also, if you can't wait that long, you don't want to give it the time, or you're just worried about it maybe getting too bubbly, or you just don't have time to deal with it, you can totally put it in the fridge. The ideal range of temperature for the kind of things that we're talking about fermenting this, it's kind of from like 55 degrees minimum to basically like 100 degrees. It won't die after 100 degrees, but it'll just it won't go any faster after that. One of the, like when you're making alcohol, for example, you generally try and have a slow fermentation, meaning that you keep it a little bit colder. A lot of wineries will do that because it promotes different kinds of flavors. So you might notice some flavor variations if you're doing this, say, in the wintertime when it's cooler out. And it also might take a little bit longer. But
can you just repeat the how many days on the counter and shaking it daily? Should anyone be concerned about it erupting?
No. I would just say, give it a shake once a day. If you leave it on the counter for like 5 days, maybe a week, I'd say probably 5 to 7 days is average. Like I said too, when you're done with it, you can either put it in the fridge if you want, or if you want, you can just keep opening it until you're certain it's not producing any more CO2, which you'll be able to tell from it bubbling, basically. And then as far as it erupting, it's not like an alcoholic fermentation where it will create tons and tons of CO2. So I think lactic acid bacteria produces like 1% of the amount of carbon dioxide that yeast does. So it'll, you'll notice that one of these little rings on here will pop up. If you see this thing on your jar, if it's popped up or it feels firm or anything, if you just open it slowly, it'll be fine. I've never personally had one like erupt over or anything. It's also one of the things that causes foaming, and if you guys have ever homebrewed or made kombucha or something, there's actually a little bit more protein content, which can create kind of a web of I guess foam, for lack of a better word. Yeah, so that is what it will look like there. So that one's not really bubbly, as you can see. So I would say that one's probably done fermenting. And again, as I said, if you decide it's 5 days, I'm eating my sauce, nobody's going to stop me. That's totally okay. Just put it in the fridge. If you do that, it'll get cold enough that it won't, even if there is anything still left to ferment in there, the bacteria in it will be too cold and tired to do anything.
And then someone asked if heat and humidity make things ferment more quickly, and if it makes it more vinegary with sugar-based fermentation. So when they make kombucha, waiting 7 days, it tastes too much like vinegar. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, heat will make things ferment a lot faster. And there's also I'll let you look at me again. So with these kind of fermentations, there's different things. So we talked about yeast being like an alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid bacteria, which is what we're doing here. There's also, they call it acetic acid bacteria, which the first time I heard that, I thought somebody was saying like acidic acid, and I was like, well, yeah. But it's acetic, and that's what vinegar is. So vinegar actually needs alcohol to become vinegar. So that kind of fermentation is actually like secondary to an alcoholic one. You will still get some of that production of acetic acid from lactic acid bacteria. And if you do want it to, avoid any kind of flavor, like if you just really hate that kind of flavor in your hot sauce, I would say just maybe it's definitely like a really pungent smell. You'll notice if there's any sort of like acetic acid, just kind of like if you take a whiff of vinegar, you know it's vinegar right away. So you can just stick it in the fridge, and that's like pushing pause on your ferment. As far as heat, it definitely, in terms of like alcoholic fermentations or sugar-based ones, it will create more of that acid if it's hotter out, because acetic acid bacteria prefers it really warm. Even if you're making vinegar, like let's say like you're trying to make apple cider vinegar out of cider, you actually need the temperature to be a little bit higher in order to facilitate that happening in less than like 10 years time, basically. It also needs a lot of oxygen, more so than like if, just taking the lid off of this and just to smell it and swirl it around and let any CO2 out of it, you won't get enough oxygen really to make a significant amount of acetic acid bacteria. Something even, it is fun to make vinegar. We'll have to do another workshop some other time on vinegar making. But if you want to do that in a reasonable amount of time, you basically have to aerate the liquid constantly. The few times I bought like a fish tank pump that's supposed to oxygenate water for fish, but you stick that in the whatever alcoholic thing you're trying to turn into vinegar and let it go open to the air. So I wouldn't worry too much about making like just straight up vinegar with this, but if you do prefer maybe like a cleaner, more like lactic acid bacteria, the lactic acid will taste kind of like maybe like a little yogurty. If you prefer more of that, I would say, if you have some cool dark place you can put it, that's totally fine. It'll probably be a little bit more in that than the more sharp kind of acid you might get from a hotter fermentation. So basically if you have this and this, you could just blend this if you don't want to like mess with it, you just want to eat your sauce. Personally, I like to separate the brine from the peppers and garlic and stuff in there. And that way you can, add the brine back to get the right consistency that you might want. I usually find that I don't like wasting a lot of the brine if I have some left over. So you can brine other things in it. It makes pretty tasty grilled chicken or tofu if you're into that kind of thing. Mom always likes it when I do that. She's a vegetarian. She doesn't eat a lot of grilled stuff. So just kind of get a little tap, get that out of there. You can also eat, some people with, like when they make pickles or sauerkraut or something like that, they actually eat the brine or drink the brine as a probiotic boost. I even thought the last time I was at LAX, there was like the juice shots in case you're hungover and have to get on a plane. They had one that was, I think it was even called like pickle juice or sauerkraut juice or something. I definitely bought a few because I was so curious, but it's cool that people are seeing the value in that. One of the nice things too about any of the stuff that you're using, it is all still probiotic, even the liquid, the solids. Those bacterial cultures are alive on everything. Mm-hmm.
And then one person had a quick question about the solids and the liquids separating when you make homemade hot sauce, and if you have any tips for preventing that.
I think you mean, I guess in terms of like while you're fermenting it or just afterwards. I guess there is some separation that'll naturally occur. If you want, what you could do if you want it to be like a more consistent thing, you can take your same strain mesh and then run like put the solids or mash it through here, and that'll keep a lot of the solids out. So basically, what's going to be left floating there is some of the leftover fiber from the peppers or the garlic or something like that. Let's see if this fits in here. We don't want to do this. Oh no, it doesn't fit. I'll have to use another jar. So sad. I've been looking forward to doing this for so long.
I'm assuming you can just use a blender too if you don't have.
Yeah, you can. It's a lot easier with a blender. That's just I actually use this. We have one of our Pulp Culture juices we use goji berries with, and they're, until you break the skins apart, they're kind of difficult to extract any like flavor or anything out of. So that's what this is for. So
Cool.
sorry to any spicy goji berries you may have in the future. Get the action shot here. You can see the kind of it's also a nice thing if you want to marinate some meats or foods, or if you're grilling stuff, you can just kind of spread this like thicker paste on there if you want to get some flavor in there. I think we got sauce, guys.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so that's there's your sauce. I'm gonna try a little bit, so if I start crying, I hope you'll forgive me. That's spicy, all right. No doubt about it.
Awesome. I'm excited.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's pretty much it. Dangerous shade of green. It's a good name for this sauce. I think I'm gonna name it that.
I like that. Yeah. So someone asked if you could add fruit. I know you kind of touched on that.
Yeah, you can really add anything, any kind of plant that you want to it. Actually, fruit's pretty cool. I have a lemon tree in my yard at home, and throwing citrus fruit, pretty big no-brainer for California-based hot sauces. Yeah, any kind of fruit. We've used, apples, peaches, berries, blackberry habanero hot sauce. Highly recommend it.
Ooh.
Yeah, and again, one of the cool things about fermenting stuff this way is that you can really add anything you want to it. But if it's in that salt brine, whatever kind of plant matter, the bacteria they're going to ferment it will be more than happy to ferment it for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was great. And I know that we'll be sending a thank you email to everybody. We'll include the link to the recording for this so that you can rewatch anytime if you want to make another round of hot sauce. And we'll also be sharing Pulp Culture's offering 20% off right now for everyone who participated. And we'll be picking someone at random to get a gift card. Highly recommend trying it. It's really cool and also really surprising. Super interesting beverage. Yeah, wish I could share one with you, Pete.
Yeah. Really good for getting the spice out of your mouth after you eat all your sauce.
But if anyone has any other questions, we'll also include a way to get in touch with Pulp Culture and with Peter. Are the products available in California?
They are. We make them here.
Yeah, so he's based in California. Pulp Culture is based in California. Unfortunately, not available yet in Chicago unless you are ordering online. They do ship to, I think, like 30-something states.
Yeah, I think we're up to 37 now.
Nice.
Yeah, if you go to our website, we will be more than happy to ship you some.
Yeah, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening and enjoys their hot sauce in a week.
Yeah, I want to see some pictures, guys.
Yes, definitely share anything that you made and what it tastes like.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for listening to me ramble on. Feel free to, Gus, you're welcome to tag me anytime.
Thank you. What is your handle? I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, you can just do at 101 Cider or at Pulp Culture.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great evening. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, guys. Glad could spice up your lives a little bit.
Bye.